Tonight on PBS News Weekend, Russian forces intensify strikes inside Ukraine as U.S. and Ukrainian officials head to Saudi Arabia for talks about a potential ceasefire. Then, 5 years after COVID-19 struck, the lasting mental and physical toll of one of the deadliest pandemics in history. And wild beavers are reintroduced into the English countryside for the first time since they were hunted into extinction there 400 years ago.
It's a really historic day for nature in this country. To see the first wild beaver release is a really important step in nature recovery.
Major funding for PBS News Weekend has been provided by the ongoing support of these individuals and institutions. And Friends of the NewsHour. This program was made possible by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting and by contributions to your PBS station from viewers like you. Thank you.
Good evening, I'm John Yang. Russia and Ukraine traded heavy drone strikes overnight and into this morning, even as American and Ukrainian officials prepare to talk about how to end the war. Kyiv says Moscow's bloody weekend of aerial attacks has led to at least 22 deaths. It comes amid a U.S. freeze on weapons shipments and intelligence sharing. Russia released this video of what it says are drone strikes on a Ukrainian military column in Russia's Kursk region. The Associated Press reports that tens of thousands of Ukrainian soldiers there are at risk of being encircled. Tonight, Secretary of State Marco Rubio heads to Saudi Arabia to meet with Ukrainian officials on Tuesday to explore diplomatic paths to ending the war. John Herbst is the former U.S. ambassador to Ukraine and Uzbekistan. He's now senior director of the Atlantic Council's Eurasia Center. Mr. Ambassador, President Trump's special envoy says the goals of this meeting in Saudi Arabia are to come up with a ceasefire and the framework of a peace agreement. How likely do you think is that to happen?
I believe that Moscow would like to continue operations. One, to pick up more Ukrainian territory before sitting down to talk, and two, to drive Ukrainian forces out of Kursk. If the administration's objective is to achieve, as it says, a durable peace, which leaves Ukraine sovereign, independent, economically viable, then it's going about it the wrong way.
Going about it the wrong way. Why do you say that?
Because Moscow believes, especially because of the gifts that President Trump has been bestowing on him, that it will be able to, in fact, kick the Ukrainians out of Russia and pick up more Ukrainian territory, because we are now weakening Ukraine's defense. We've stopped military shipments. We've stopped providing intel. And it's not a surprise that the Russians are trying hard to again, conduct an offensive in Kursk, their oblast, where Ukrainian forces have been since August.
So ending arms shipments, ending intelligence sharing, you say those are gifts to Putin?
They're gifts to Putin. And he hasn't, quote unquote, ended it. He's paused it. But first, it seemed to be a pause because of the unfortunate meeting between himself and Zelensky on February 28 in the Oval Office. But then, after Zelensky apologized and Trump seemed satisfied, they put on new conditions. Like now, this will be paused until we see peace talks really starting to move or negotiations set. So undetermined. And again, Putin is taking advantage of this absence of American help to make gains on the battlefield. So if you want to empower Putin, the aggressor, do exactly what you're doing. No, I'm not saying that's Trump's goal, but that's the impact of his decisions.
On this point, there was an interview with Mr. Trump that was broadcast this morning on Fox News, and he was asked whether he's being tough on Russia, and here's what he had to say.
I think I've been very tough to Russia. Tougher than anybody's ever been to Russia. Putin would be the first to say it. Nobody's been tougher than Trump.
What do you say to that?
Well, if he's talking about his decision in 2017 to give javelins to Ukraine, I say that's absolutely right. Obama was too timid to do that. If you're talking about now, Well, no. He's again taken serious measures that are weakening Ukraine's ability to defend itself, and he's done nothing to the aggressor. I believe because he's being criticized precisely along these lines, he said, well, maybe we'll put some economic pressure on him. But he talks about economic pressure on Russia. He takes strong measures against Ukraine. It's easy to see what's going on.
In that Oval Office meeting you referred to, he told Zelensky that he didn't have the cards to keep going. Using that analogy, what kind of hand is Vladimir Putin holding?
The president just took several cards out of Zelensky's hands. One, stopping American military shipments. Two, stopping American intel sharing. And three, we're hearing reports that he's trying to stop European supplies from getting to Ukraine. They're trying to stop commercial satellite companies from providing imagery which could help Ukraine now that they don't have American intelligence. So these are all cards he's taking out of the hand of the weaker party, of the victim. So this may be a self-fulfilling statement.
I want to ask you also about the broader U.S.-European relationship. We've heard France essentially say that we're on our own now. We're going to use our own nuclear weapons as deterrent. What's this done to that alliance?
Well, it has certainly shaken the alliance, and not just in Europe. People around the world are seeing this. And I think it's based upon an approach that doesn't understand how our alliance system has served our interests greatly. Not perfectly. Trump's right, and he's done well at getting our allies to spend more on defense. But this alliance system has been the pillar of world peace since the end of World War II. It's been not the only reason, but the principal reason why there has not been a major war between great powers. And there's no question that the greatest danger to the United States is when major wars, if we're in a major war with a great power. And the way you bungle into a major war with a major adversary, is to appear weak. And I'd have to say the administration right now, it appears, if not weak, then fatuous.
Former Ambassador John Herbst, thank you very much.
My pleasure.
In other news, a fourth day of deadly clashes in western Syria is testing the country's new leadership. Government security forces are fighting gunmen loyal to ousted President Bashar al-Assad. But human rights groups say hundreds of civilians, including members of the Alawite minority that was Assad's base of support, have been victims of revenge killings. In a statement, Secretary of State Marco Rubio said, "The United States stands with Syria's religious and ethnic minorities and offers its condolences to the victims and their families." Syria's interim president called for peace and said the killings would be investigated. Israel says it's cutting off the electricity it sends to Gaza. Gaza's plants that produce drinking water from seawater are powered by electricity. Israel's already stopped all goods and aid from entering the territory. Israel is pressing Hamas to extend the first phase of the ceasefire that ended last weekend. Hamas is pushing to start phase 2 negotiations. Neither side's budged, but Israel says it's sending negotiators to Qatar on Monday to continue talks. In Washington, Secret Service officers shot a man brandishing a gun near the White House early this morning. The agency said the suspect is believed to have been suicidal and to have traveled from Indiana. He was taken to a hospital. His condition's not known. No Secret Service officers were injured. Mr. Trump's been at Mar-a-Lago since Friday evening. And this weekend marks 60 years since state troopers brutally attacked civil rights marchers on the Edmund Pettus Bridge in Selma, Alabama. It came to be known as Bloody Sunday. Pictures of the day's violence shocked the nation and stirred support for the Voting Rights Act of 1965. Supreme Court rulings over the last dozen years have gutted key parts of that law. This past week, Democratic Congresswoman Terry Sewell of Alabama introduced a bill to restore some of those provisions. The measure hasn't drawn any support from Republicans who control the House. Still to come on PBS News Weekend, the enduring impact of the COVID-19 pandemic 5 years later. And centuries after their extinction, beavers return to the wild in England.
This is PBS News Weekend from the David M. Rubenstein studio at WETA in Washington, home of the PBS NewsHour, weeknights on PBS.
It was 5 years ago this week that the World Health Organization called the COVID-19 outbreak a pandemic. In the United States, officials declared a national emergency, triggering travel bans for non-U.S. citizens and shutdowns nationwide. Now, many who lived through the pandemic, including those who treated infected patients, are still dealing with the fallout. Ali Rogan has their story.
John, the events which began in 2020 changed people's lives. Nearly 75% of people said the pandemic took a toll on them, according to a new Pew Research survey. We spoke with people across the country about how the pandemic transformed their everyday lives.
My name is Aubrey Nagot. I live in Philadelphia.
My name is Kristen Urquiza, and I live in San Francisco, California.
My name is Me'alani Ayer, and I live in Seattle, Washington.
My name is Steph Fowler, and I live in Chicago.
My name is Rachel Valdez, and I live in Portland, Oregon.
Life before the pandemic for me was very active. I was super busy, loved hiking, doing things on the weekends, and going to lots of concerts.
Before COVID started, I was finishing up graduate school.
My life before COVID, I was working as a software engineer.
These are unprecedented times was the phrase. And it really was. There was no class in grad school that prepared you for helping people through a pandemic. At the same time, you're trying to cope with it yourself.
I was a labor and delivery nurse, and so the trauma of having pregnant people have COVID, get really sick and die, and then trying to save the baby, it made me not want to be a labor and delivery nurse anymore. It was scary.
The pandemic completely transformed my life. I lost my dad, Mark Urquiza, early on to COVID-19. It was one of the most agonizing experiences I've had in my entire life. To have to say goodbye to him over a computer screen was so foreign.
Once I did get infected, I pretty quickly, within like 6 weeks or so, noticed some drastic changes to my health. Eventually, we did determine it was long COVID.
Yeah, so long COVID has taken a lot from me. I'm seeing my mobility is greatly limited. I'm also seeing my cognitive ability be limited.
COVID has not gone away. COVID-19 is still with us. It's still with me every day.
It's really hard to wrap my brain around all the changes that have happened in the last 5 years. I think partially because a lot of times I feel like I'm living in a different reality than other people.
Because of COVID, I've been navigating, personal grief as well as collective grief over the course of the last 5 years. We're working to make sure that everyone is remembered through a national COVID memorial.
For more on the pandemic and its lasting effects, we turn to Sasha McBain, a clinical psychologist at Rush University Medical Center, and Dr. Fritz Francois, Chief of Hospital Operations at NYU Langone Health. Dr. McBain, I'd like to start with you. Many of the people we heard from in that clip and through the years in our reporting cite a sense of loss, either of a loved one or of their own sense of identity following the pandemic. How have you been advising people moving through those feelings?
The first thing is to label it as grief and loss. Before the pandemic, I think we had a narrow idea of what grief meant. And over the last few years, we've been validating different forms of grief in a bigger way. And so I think that labeling is an important first piece and gives us new avenues for coping and emotional processing when we can validate these experiences are just that, grief.
Dr. Francois, we heard from a nurse who spoke about how difficult it was to get through that period in labor and delivery. Tell us more about what it was like for medical professionals on the front lines.
Indeed, it was very difficult, and it's something that you can't prepare for. For us at NYU Langone, the experience was a little bit different because we went through a crisis back in 2012, Superstorm Sandy, that then allowed us to do something different, which is to start preparing for what ifs. And believe it or not, back in the fall of 2019, we prepared for such a what if. We asked the question, what if there was an outbreak of Middle East respiratory syndrome? And we held that tabletop exercise on January 8th, 2020, and had more than a 6-week lead time to prepare. And that helped our staff to deal with all the uncertainties that COVID brought.
To that end, Dr. Francois, if I could stick with you, what lessons have you and your colleagues derived from the early days of the pandemic that they might apply to such emergencies in the future?
I think the most important lesson is, to the extent possible, to be prepared. And what I mean by that is that there are a lot that we don't know during crises, but you at least try to anticipate to the extent possible of what you might need. And the basics, such as thinking about appropriate staffing, thinking about supplies, thinking about equipment, asking the question of what if, and being prepared to pivot. You do the best you can with the information that you have, and we have new information, then you adjust. And that lesson, I think, continues to this day.
Dr. McBain, we heard in that clip from some people struggling with long COVID, and they talk about how they feel like they're existing in a reality that's different from other people for whom COVID is more of an afterthought these days. What is that like psychologically for people who might be dealing with lasting impacts of a COVID infection?
It's incredibly isolating in your social circles when you're trying to access care, thinking about navigating work and family roles. My expertise is in medical traumatic stress, and so these sensations that arise in the body can also be reminders of what had happened in the past in terms of hospitalization and recovery, and can create this distance in the people that we previously felt very connected with. So I think that isolation, uncertainty about how to move forward is really common.
I want to ask both of you this next question. What lessons do you think we should learn writ large from this pandemic? Dr. McBain, why don't you start?
One of the positives that's come from this time is an increasing awareness about mental health and the ways that we need to protect our mental health every day, how to pull in appropriate resources for resilience, and how to access the care that we need. So I think that one of the lessons learned is having a really strong infrastructure for our mental health system to support people when these types of crises come up, when people are dealing with the long-term effects, in ways that support wellness, integration into society, and individual mental health as well.
Dr. Francois, the same question for you. What about on the individual level for doctors? How are they thinking about the lessons that have come out of this period?
I will echo Dr. McBain's comment about the importance of infrastructure. And for doctors, for other providers, the importance of being prepared, being proactive is critically important because of the uncertainty of what is to come. For us at NYU Langone, having a culture in which we continue to ask the question about what if, and to take steps to support our staff has been incredibly powerful. The idea that we want to ask the questions, we want to do research, we want to learn new things that can help us to better serve our patients, that can better help us to support our staff, and help us to also serve our communities.
Dr. Sasha McBain and Dr. Fritz Francois, thank you both so much for being here.
Pleasure.
Thank you.
Beavers were hunted into extinction in England in the 17th century. This past week, for the first time, beavers were legally released into the English countryside. Conservationists hailed it as a watershed moment for this keystone species, which helps combat flooding and drought by engineering the landscape with dams and channels. Alex Thompson of Independent Television News was at Purbeck Nature Reserve in Dorset for the historic event.
The sea mist wreathed Corfe Castle from dawn. But the way is now cleared for beavers here and beyond. A short walk to the edge of the ponds. In the National Trust's Purbeck Reserve. X literally marks the spot so many have worked so long to achieve.
Why is that exciting for someone like me who spent 40 years working to restore nature? Today marks something really exciting, which sounds like a small thing, which is 2 pairs of beavers being released here at Purbeck, but actually is a big, bold step in reversing the decline of beavers.
All but cut off from the mainland, Purbeck's a stunning landscape of lagoon, bog, forest. At the designated release spot, the cordon is up. They're ready. Final preparations, remote cameras in place, and they arrive. 2 beavers driven overnight from Tayside, 9 hours north. Bang on time, the crates are set down. They emerge, a little stressed, hesitant even. This, the first of many legal releases after a 400-year absence, as these animals were hunted to extinction for their fur, meat, and even scent glands.
It's a really historic day for nature in this country. To see the first wild beaver release is a really important step in nature recovery.
Not everyone is convinced. The NFU sceptical, verging on hostile to government-sponsored reintroduction across England.
There's just not a realistic option there for farmers to be able to manage the impact for beavers. You know, there will be cases where they need to remove beavers. There will be places where our members will not want to see them. And we just don't think that is there in this current plan.
But the government insisted today robust impact management is in place.
There will be capital grants available to deal with any beaver impacts, including the ability to remove beaver dams within 2 weeks of their construction, should they pose a risk to crops, and also, in extremis, to use lethal control.
Spring hedge planting this morning, local farmer Ian Baggs is, well, constructively sceptical. It could work, it should work, but it needs more government support.
So the challenge we've got is that there's lots of benefits and there's a positive story here, but there's also risks. And the benefits are societal, the risks are to individual small businesses. So
farmers.
Including farmers and potentially other landowners, people who live in houses that are subject to flooding.
Beavers, of course, create dams which filter river water, purifying it. Their ponds bring hosts of insects and thus birds and reptiles. That water protects river systems from both droughts and floods. But Purbeck's idyllic nature reserve is the easy bit, studded with heath, forest, lakes and no farming. So where do we go from here? Well, the rather messy reality is that the beavers will breed, and they'll breed a lot from this and other sites, and they'll spread out across England. And down the line we'll arrive at a balance, perhaps uncomfortable, where in some areas they'll be cherished and will thrive and will be loved. In other areas, frankly, they're going to get moved or they'll be shot, legally or illegally. That might sound brutal, but ultimately we will have replaced a key species, a missing piece of our biodiversity jigsaw after centuries. And that surely is progress. So today's legal release joins what are known as beaver bombings, the illegal release of animals already thriving in England, hundreds of them. Achieving the right balance in all this will take time, but the official beginnings of that started today.
That's Alex Thompson of Independent Television News. And that is PBS News Weekend for this Sunday. I'm John Yang. For all of my colleagues, thanks for joining us. Have a good week.
Major funding for PBS News Weekend has been provided by...
In 1995, two friends set out to make wireless coverage accessible to all. With no long-term contracts, nationwide coverage, and 100% U.S.-based customer support. Consumer Cellular. Freedom calls.
The ongoing support of these individuals and institutions. This program was made possible by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting and by contributions to your PBS station from viewers like you. Thank you.
You're watching PBS.